My name is Cordelia Blackwood, and at 32 years old, I never imagined I'd be standing in the ruins of my former life, plotting the most elaborate comeback in corporate history. If you're watching this story unfold, drop a comment below, telling me about a time someone underestimated you. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances, and subscribe to hear how I turned my greatest humiliation into my sweetest victory. For 15 years, I poured my heart and soul into Meridian Industries, the tech consulting firm founded by my mentor and father figure, Augustus Sterling. What started as an internship during my senior year at MIT became my entire world. I wasn't just an employee at Meridian. I was family, or so I thought. Augustus Sterling was the closest thing to a father I'd ever known. My real parents died in a car accident when I was 12, leaving me to be raised by my elderly grandmother in a small town outside Portland. When Grammy passed away during my sophomore year of college, Augustus didn't just offer me condolences. He offered me a home for Christmas break, a summer internship, and eventually, a career that would define my 20s and early 30s. "You have something special, Cordelia," Augustus would tell me during our weekly mentorship meetings. "You see patterns where others see chaos. You understand technology not just as code, but as a bridge to human connection." Under his guidance, I developed innovative software solutions that revolutionized how companies managed their digital infrastructure. My flagship creation, the Nexus Integration Platform, became the backbone of Meridian's success, generating over $60 million in revenue over 5 years. But Augustus wasn't the only Sterling who mattered in my story. His son, Maximilian Sterling, was everything his father wasn't: arrogant, entitled, and utterly incompetent. Max, as he insisted everyone call him, had coasted through an Ivy League education on his father's donations and spent his 20s traveling the world on the company's dime under the guise of international business development. While I was working 16-hour days perfecting algorithms and securing major contracts, Max was posting Instagram photos from Bali and Monaco. Despite his obvious shortcomings, Augustus harbored dreams of Max eventually taking over the family business. "He just needs time to mature," Augustus would say whenever Max's latest failure came to light. "He has good instincts underneath all that wild energy." I watched with growing concern as Augustus gradually began involving Max in important meetings and strategic decisions, always with the implicit understanding that this was preparation for his eventual succession. The third key player in this drama was Serafina Cross, the company's chief marketing officer and Max's on-and-off girlfriend of several years. Serafina was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. She had joined Meridian 3 years earlier after a successful stint at a Fortune 500 consulting firm, and her polished exterior concealed a calculating mind that was always working 3 moves ahead. While I focused on the technical side of our business, Serafina crafted the narratives that sold our solutions to clients. What I didn't realize at the time was that Serafina and Max had been planning their own version of a corporate takeover, one that would leave me completely out in the cold. The warning signs were there, but I was too trusting to see them clearly. Over the past year, I'd noticed subtle changes in office dynamics. Conversations would stop when I entered rooms. Important emails somehow failed to reach my inbox. Client meetings I'd been instrumental in securing were suddenly being handled by other team members. When I raised these concerns with Augustus, he dismissed them as growing pains from our recent expansion. "You're being paranoid, Cordelia," he said with that paternal smile that always made me feel safe. "Max is just trying to take on more responsibility. It's natural that there would be some adjustment period." The ends began on a Tuesday morning in March. I arrived at the office to find my keycard had been deactivated. The security guard, Jerome, whom I'd chatted with every morning for 8 years, looked uncomfortable as he explained that there had been changes to access protocols and that I needed to speak with HR immediately. Sarah Martinez, our HR director and someone I considered a friend, could barely make eye contact as she delivered the devastating news. "There have been some concerns raised about your recent performance and commitment to the company," she said, reading from a prepared script. "Concerns? I laughed, thinking this had to be some kind of mistake. Sarah, you know my track record. The Nexus platform alone has generated more revenue than any other single innovation in Meridian's history. Her face remained stone-cold professional. There have been allegations of intellectual property concerns. Questions about whether certain innovations were entirely your own work, or if you had assistance that wasn't properly documented. The room started spinning. Are you suggesting I stole something? From whom? I'm not at liberty to discuss the specific allegations, Sarah continued. But effective immediately, you're being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. You'll need to surrender your company laptop, access cards, and any proprietary materials. This couldn't be happening. After 15 years of loyalty, innovation, and dedication, I was being treated like a common thief. I want to speak with Augustus immediately, I demanded. Sarah's expression flickered with something that might have been sympathy. Mr. Sterling is in meetings all day. He's aware of the situation. As security escorted me out of the building that had been my second home for over a decade, I caught a glimpse of Max through his office window. He was leaning back in his chair, feet up on his desk, talking animatedly on his phone. When he saw me being walked out by security, he didn't look surprised. He looked satisfied. The next 2 weeks were a nightmare of legal consultations, character assassination, and professional isolation. The allegations against me were vague but damaging. Suggestions that I had misrepresented my contributions to major projects, that I had used company resources for personal gain, that my recent work had been subpar. None of it was true, but in the corporate world, perception often matters more than reality. My attempts to reach Augustus were met with cold responses from his assistant. Mr. Sterling is unavailable became a refrain I heard dozens of times. When I finally managed to corner him in the parking garage of our office building, the conversation that followed shattered what remained of my faith in human decency. Augustus, please, I pleaded. You know me. You know I would never do anything to harm Meridian or betray your trust. These allegations are completely fabricated. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like guilt. Cordelia, I want to believe you, but there's evidence. What evidence? I interrupted. Show me this evidence. Files that suggest irregularities, code that doesn't match your usual patterns, communications that raise questions about your loyalty to the company. That's impossible, because I never sent any communications questioning my loyalty, and every line of code I've written has been meticulously documented. Augustus sighed heavily. Max brought these concerns to my attention. He's been conducting his own review of departmental efficiency and... Max? I couldn't hide my incredulity. Augustus. Max can barely operate his smartphone, let alone conduct a technical review of my work. You're telling me you're taking his word over 15 years of my proven track record? He's my son, Cordelia, and he's shown me evidence that I can't ignore. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. This man, whom I'd loved like a father, was choosing to believe manufactured evidence over our years of relationship and my documented contributions to his company's success. 3 days later, I received a formal termination letter citing performance issues, potential intellectual property violations, and failure to maintain the standards expected of senior staff. Along with the letter came a non-disclosure agreement and a severance package that was insultingly small given my years of service. The NDA was particularly galling. It essentially prevented me from discussing my termination or defending my reputation in any public forum. The implied threat was clear. Sign this and accept your professional death quietly, or face an expensive legal battle against a company with far deeper pockets than mine. But the most devastating blow came 2 weeks after my termination, when I learned through industry contacts that Meridian had just announced the launch of the Sterling Integration Suite, a revolutionary new software platform that bore a striking resemblance to the Nexus system I had spent years developing. Max Sterling was being hailed as the innovative mind behind this breakthrough technology. with Serafina Cross leading the marketing campaign that positioned him as a visionary leader, ready to take Meridian into its next phase of growth. They hadn't just fired me, they had stolen my life's work and were using it to build Max's reputation as Augustus's worthy successor. The media coverage was extensive and glowing. Tech magazines featured Max on their covers. Industry conferences invited him as a keynote speaker. Augustus beamed with pride as he introduced his son as the brilliant architect of Meridian's next generation of solutions. Meanwhile, I was effectively blacklisted. My attempts to find new employment were met with polite rejections or worse, complete silence. Word had gotten out about my departure from Meridian, and in the tight-knit world of tech consulting, a reputation takes years to build and seconds to destroy. I spent the next 6 months in my small apartment, watching my savings dwindle and my professional network evaporate. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket. Some days I couldn't even get out of bed. I kept replaying every interaction with Augustus, Max, and Serafina, trying to understand how I could have been so blind to their manipulation. But during those dark months, something else was growing alongside my despair, a cold, calculating anger that would eventually fuel the most satisfying comeback of my career. A turning point came on a rainy Thursday in October. I was at my lowest point, seriously considering abandoning tech altogether and maybe getting a job at a local coffee shop, when I received an unexpected email from someone named Dr. Evangeline Reeves, the Chief Technology Officer at Quantum Solutions, a boutique consulting firm that specialized in cybersecurity and data protection. Miss Blackwood, the email read, I've been following your work for several years and was shocked to learn of your departure from Meridian Industries. I understand there may have been some professional difficulties, but I'm more interested in your technical capabilities than in office politics. Would you be available for a confidential conversation about a potential opportunity? Dr. Reeves, it turned out, was a legend in the cybersecurity field. A woman who had built her reputation by exposing corporate fraud and protecting whistleblowers. She was also someone who had her own complicated history with Augustus Sterling, having lost a major contract to Meridian several years earlier under circumstances she had always suspected involved industrial espionage. I've been waiting for the right opportunity to take a closer look at Meridian's recent innovations, she told me during our first meeting at a quiet cafe outside the city. The timing of your departure and the launch of their new platform raises some interesting questions. Evangeline offered me something I desperately needed, not just employment, but the chance to use my skills in service of uncovering the truth. Quantum Solutions had recently been hired by a consortium of companies to investigate potential intellectual property theft in the tech consulting industry. While they couldn't target Meridian directly without cause, they could certainly investigate if evidence of wrongdoing happened to surface. I'm not asking you to do anything unethical, Evangeline made clear. But if you were to discover that your former employer had misappropriated your work, we would have both the legal framework and the technical expertise to pursue justice. Over the next 4 months, while officially working as a senior consultant for Quantum Solutions, I began the painstaking process of building a case against Meridian. It wasn't enough to know they had stolen my work. I needed to prove it in a way that would stand up to legal scrutiny and public examination. The breakthrough came when I remembered something that Max and Serafina couldn't possibly have known about: the digital signatures embedded in my original code. Years earlier, following Evangeline's cybersecurity protocols, I had developed the habit of including subtle, nearly invisible markers in my programming, unique sequences that served as proof of authorship without affecting the software's functionality. Using my legitimate access to industry databases and reverse engineering techniques, I was able to analyze the publicly available information about Meridian's Sterling integration suite. What I found was even more damaging than I had hoped. Not only were my digital signatures present throughout the code, but the system also contained several critical vulnerabilities that I had documented in my original security reports. Vulnerabilities that I had warned Augustus about. but that he had deemed too expensive to fix at the time. This gave me something even better than proof of theft. I had evidence that Meridian was knowingly selling compromised software to their clients. But I needed more than technical proof. I needed documentation that would clearly establish the timeline of my innovations versus their product launch. This required getting inside information from Meridian, which seemed impossible given my termination and the NDA I had signed. The solution came from an unexpected source. Jerome, the security guard who had looked so uncomfortable the day I was escorted from the building. 6 months after my termination, he reached out through a mutual acquaintance to let me know that he was planning to retire and that he had been troubled by what he had witnessed during my final weeks at Meridian. I've been working security for 30 years, Jerome told me during a clandestine meeting at a diner near his home. I know the difference between someone who's done wrong and someone who's been wronged. The way they treated you, it wasn't right. Jerome revealed that he had access to something I desperately needed: the building's security footage from the weeks leading up to my termination. The footage showed Nax and Serafina entering the building at unusual hours, accessing areas they normally had no business being in, and spending significant time in my office and lab space when I wasn't present. More importantly, Jerome had kept copies of the electronic access logs that showed exactly when and where Max and Serafina had been in the building. Cross-referenced with my own work schedule and the timeline of my project development, these logs painted a clear picture of systematic infiltration of my workspace and theft of my materials. Armed with this evidence, Dr. Reeves and I developed a multi-phase plan that would not only expose Meridian's theft, but also demonstrate the security vulnerabilities they were selling to unsuspecting clients. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We will use Meridian's own stolen technology against them. Phase 1 involved documenting everything meticulously. Working with Quantum Solutions' legal team, we prepared a comprehensive report that detailed the theft of my intellectual property, the security vulnerabilities in the Sterling integration suite, and the potential legal and financial exposure facing Meridian's clients. Phase 2 required reaching out to Meridian's current clients, not to make accusations, but to offer complimentary security assessments through Quantum Solutions. Several major companies agreed to let us analyze their newly implemented Sterling integration systems purely as a professional courtesy. What we found during these assessments was damning. Every single implementation contained the vulnerabilities I had originally identified, plus several new ones that had been introduced during Max's sloppy modifications to my code. We were looking at systems that could be compromised by any moderately skilled hacker, putting sensitive corporate data at risk. Phase 3 was where things got really interesting. Rather than immediately expose these vulnerabilities, we developed a controlled demonstration that would reveal the security flaws in a dramatic but harmless way. Working with our clients' IT teams, we designed a scenario where we would temporarily gain access to non-sensitive test systems during a company-wide presentation, proving that the security flaws were real and immediate. The stage was set for the most satisfying professional vindication I could have imagined. The annual Tech Connect conference in downtown Seattle was the premier gathering for technology consulting professionals on the West Coast. For 3 days every November, the industry's biggest names gathered to showcase innovations, share best practices, and network with potential clients and partners. This year's conference held special significance for Meridian Industries, as Max Sterling was scheduled to deliver the closing keynote address on the future of integrated business solutions. The marketing materials featured his photograph prominently, with quotes praising his revolutionary approach to software architecture and visionary leadership in the next generation of business technology. What Nax, Serafina, and Augustus didn't know was that Dr. Reeves had also been invited to present at the conference. Her panel, scheduled for the morning of Max's keynote, was titled Cybersecurity Challenges in Modern Business Integration, a topic that would prove to be remarkably relevant. 2 days before the conference, we put the final pieces of our plan into motion. Dr. Reeves sent a formal letter to Augustus Sterling, copying the legal departments of 3 major Meridian clients, documenting our security findings, and offering a private meeting to discuss the implications before any public disclosure. Augustus's response was swift and predictable. A threatening letter from Meridian's legal team accusing us of corporate espionage, contract violation, and defamation. They demanded that we cease all investigation into their systems and threatened both criminal prosecution and a civil lawsuit if we continued our harassment campaign. The letter was exactly what we had hoped for, evidence that Meridian was more interested in covering up problems than solving them. On the morning of November 15th, I stood in the lobby of the Seattle Convention Center, wearing a professional suit I had purchased specifically for this occasion. After almost a year of unemployment and financial struggle, I felt like myself again, confident, prepared, and ready to reclaim my professional identity. Dr. Reeves's presentation drew a packed audience of IT professionals, security experts, and business leaders. Using carefully anonymized examples, she walked through several case studies of security vulnerabilities in popular business integration platforms. Without naming Meridian specifically, she demonstrated how supposedly secure systems can be compromised through fundamental flaws in their architecture. The audience was riveted as Evangeline showed real-time demonstrations of these vulnerabilities, using controlled environments to illustrate how easily sensitive data could be accessed by unauthorized users. Several people in the audience were taking notes frantically, clearly recognizing similarities to systems they had recently implemented. During the question and answer period that followed, the conversation inevitably turned to how companies could protect themselves from these types of vulnerabilities. That's when Dr. Reeves dropped the first bombshell. The most important thing, she said, is to verify the authenticity and security of any platform before implementation. We've recently discovered several instances where proprietary code appears to have been misappropriated and repackaged without proper security review. In some cases, the original developers of these systems had identified and documented security flaws that were ignored when the code was repurposed. A hand shot up from the middle of the audience. Are you saying that some companies are selling stolen software with known security flaws? I'm saying that due diligence is more important than ever, Evangeline replied carefully, and that technical innovation should always be verified by examining the actual architecture, not just accepting marketing claims. Now, at that moment, Augustus Sterling entered the back of the conference room. Word had clearly reached him about the nature of Dr. Reeves's presentation. His face was pale, and I could see his hands shaking slightly as he realized the implications of what was being discussed. But the real fireworks were still to come. Max Sterling took the stage for his keynote address that afternoon to thunderous applause. He looked confident and polished, every inch the successful technology executive. His presentation began with a slick overview of Meridian's recent innovations, featuring impressive graphics and testimonials from satisfied clients. The Sterling Integration Suite represents a complete reimagining of how businesses can connect their various technology platforms, Max declared, clicking to a slide that showed the system's architecture. This platform, which I developed over the past 3 years, creates seamless data flow while maintaining the highest levels of security and efficiency. I was sitting in the 3rd row, directly in his line of sight, but Max seemed to look right through me. Perhaps he assumed I wouldn't dare show my face at such a prominent industry event, or maybe he was so absorbed in his performance that he didn't register my presence. His presentation continued for 20 minutes, with Max taking full credit for innovations I had spent years developing. He discussed the breakthrough insights that had led to the platform's unique architecture, the revolutionary approach to data integration that set it apart from competitors, and the visionary engineering that made it all possible. When he opened the floor for questions, Dr. Reeves stood up. "Mr. Sterling," she said in a clear voice that carried throughout the auditorium, "your presentation is quite impressive. I'm curious about the security protocols built into your integration platform. How do you address potential vulnerabilities in cross-system data transmission? Max's confident smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the type of softball question he had been expecting. Well, he began, we've implemented comprehensive security measures throughout the platform. Our team has thoroughly tested the system for any potential vulnerabilities. I see, Dr. Reeds continued. And are you familiar with the specific security documentation that was developed during the platform's initial design phase? I understand there were some concerns raised about potential access points that could be exploited by unauthorized users. The room had gone completely silent. Max looked confused and slightly panicked. He clearly had no idea what security documentation she was referring to, because he hadn't been involved in the original development process. Our security team handles those technical details, he stammered. I can connect you with them after the presentation if you have specific questions. Dr. Reeves nodded pleasantly. Actually, I think it would be more appropriate to demonstrate these concerns directly, with your permission, of course. Before Max could respond, the large screens flanking the stage lit up with a live demonstration. Dr. Reeves had arranged for a real-time penetration test of one of Meridian's client systems, a test that had been fully authorized by the client but kept confidential from Meridian. The audience watched in stunned silence as the demonstration showed exactly how easily the Sterling integration suite could be compromised. Within minutes, Dr. Reeves' team had gained access to supposedly secure data, demonstrating each of the vulnerabilities I had originally identified and documented. Max's face had gone from confident to confused to horrified as he realized what was happening. This is some kind of setup, he managed to say. You can't just hack into our systems during a live presentation. We're not hacking into your systems, Dr. Reeds replied calmly. We're demonstrating security flaws with the full permission of the affected client. These are vulnerabilities that were documented by the original developer of your platform, but apparently ignored during the implementation process. That's when I stood up. Max, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent auditorium. Those security vulnerabilities were documented in my reports to your father over 2 years ago, reports that were filed under my name regarding the system I developed before you had any involvement in the project. The recognition finally dawned in Max's eyes. He saw me sitting there, no longer the defeated former employee who had been escorted out by security, but a professional who had been building her case methodically and patiently. Cordelia? He whispered into his microphone, the sound amplifying throughout the room. Hello, Max, I replied, standing and turning to address the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Cordelia Blackwood. I was the principal developer of the system you just saw demonstrated, originally called the Nexus Integration Platform. I spent over 3 years perfecting this technology while employed at Meridian Industries under the mentorship of Augustus Sterling. The auditorium erupted in murmurs and whispers as people began to understand what was unfolding. The security vulnerabilities Dr. Reeds just demonstrated were documented in my original security reports that recommended specific modifications to address these flaws. Those modifications were deemed too expensive to implement at the time. However, when the system was rebranded as the Sterling Integration Suite and attributed to Max Sterling, those same vulnerabilities were carried over unchanged. Max was frantically gesturing to someone offstage, probably trying to get the presentation shut down. But it was too late. The damage was done, and the audience was completely engaged. Dr. Reeves took control again. What Miss Blackwood is describing represents a serious breach of intellectual property rights and professional ethics. But more importantly, it represents a significant security risk to every company that has implemented this platform. She clicked to her next slide, which showed a timeline comparing my original development work at Meridian with the launch of the Sterling Integration Suite. The dates made it impossible to deny that Max's supposed 3 years of development overlapped exactly with my time at the company. We have comprehensive documentation proving that the Sterling integration suite is substantially identical to Ms. Blackwood's original Nexus platform, including proprietary algorithms, unique architectural features, and yes, the same security vulnerabilities that Ms. Blackwood identified and reported. The audience was no longer just murmuring. People were pulling out their phones, taking pictures, and starting to leave their seats. Several individuals who I recognized as Meridian clients were having urgent conversations with their colleagues. Max made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "This is all fabricated," he said desperately. "These allegations are completely false, and we'll be pursuing legal action against anyone who continues to spread these lies." That's when Dr. Reeves revealed her final piece of evidence. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "would you be willing to answer some technical questions about the platform you claim to have developed? For instance, can you explain the algorithmic approach used in the data verification module?" Max's expression went blank. He had no idea what she was talking about, because he hadn't developed any of it. Or perhaps you could discuss the rationale behind the specific encryption protocols used in cross-platform authentication. Silence. What about the decision to implement redundant backup systems in the database management module? More silence. While Max stood on stage looking like a deer in headlights, I decided it was time to end his misery. The algorithmic approach uses a modified Monte Carlo method for data verification. I called out from my seat. The encryption protocols implement a hybrid RSA-AES system with rotating keys based on user behavior patterns. And the redundant backup systems were designed to prevent data loss during system integration failures, based on a case study I conducted of similar platform failures in the telecommunications industry. The specificity and confidence of my answers, contrasted with Max's obvious ignorance of his own supposed creation, made the truth undeniably clear to everyone in the room. Dr. Reeves nodded approvingly. "Ms. Blackwood, would you be willing to join me on stage to discuss the actual development process of this platform?" As I walked toward the stage, I felt a sense of vindication that was almost overwhelming. For over a year, I had been portrayed as a disgraced former employee who had been terminated for cause. Now, in front of hundreds of industry professionals, the truth was finally being revealed. The next 30 minutes were the most satisfying of my professional career. I walked the audience through the genuine development process of what had been stolen and rebranded as the Sterling Integration Suite. I explained the technical challenges I had overcome, the innovative solutions I had developed, and yes, the security concerns I had identified and reported. Throughout my explanation, Max remained on stage, his face growing redder by the minute. Occasionally, he would try to interrupt with weak protests, but his complete inability to engage with any technical details made his claims increasingly absurd. The audience, meanwhile, was completely engaged. These were experienced professionals who understood technology, and they could clearly distinguish between my detailed technical knowledge and Max's empty marketing speak. When I finished my presentation, the auditorium erupted in applause. Not the polite professional applause that usually greets conference presentations, but genuine, enthusiastic recognition of someone who had been wronged and was finally getting her due. Dr. Reeves stepped forward for the conclusion. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed today represents more than just a case of intellectual property theft. It represents the importance of verifying technical claims, conducting proper due diligence, and ensuring that the people taking credit for innovations are actually the people who created them." She paused for effect. Quantum Solutions will be releasing a full technical report on these findings within the week. We will also be working with any affected clients to address the security vulnerabilities in their current systems and, where appropriate, to pursue legal remedies for the damages they have suffered. As the presentation ended and people began filing out of the auditorium, I saw Augustus Sterling pushing his way through the crowd toward the stage. His face was a mask of fury and what might have been shame. "Cordelia," he said when he reached me, his voice tight with controlled anger, "what do you think you're accomplishing with this stunt? You signed a non-disclosure agreement. You're in breach of contract, and we will pursue every legal remedy available to us." I looked at the man who had once been like a father to me, and I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. "Augustus," I said calmly, "the non-disclosure agreement I signed pertained to the circumstances of my termination, not to my ownership of intellectual property that was developed under my name and with my documented contributions. Your son has been taking credit for my work and selling systems with serious security flaws to unsuspecting clients. That's fraud, not just a personnel matter. You're destroying everything I've built," he said, and for a moment he looked less like an angry executive and more like a tired old man. "No," I replied. "You destroyed it yourself when you chose to believe lies over truth, when you chose your son's ego over your company's integrity. I'm just making sure the truth finally comes to light." Max had finally managed to escape from the stage and was standing beside his father, looking shell-shocked. "Dad," he said quietly, "we need to call the lawyers. We need to shut this down before it goes any further." I almost laughed. "Max, it's already gone further than you can imagine. Every word of this presentation was recorded. Every piece of evidence we've presented has been verified by independent experts. You clients are already asking questions, and some of them are already consulting with their own legal teams." I gestured to Dr. Reeves, who was speaking with a group of IT executives near the front of the auditorium. Dr. Reeves has been building this case for months. She has documented proof of the intellectual property theft, expert testimony about the security vulnerabilities, and evidence of the damages your fraudulent claims have caused to multiple companies. Augustus tried one more approach. "What do you want, Cordelia? Money? A public apology? Your job back? What will it take to make this go away?" I considered his question for a moment. A year ago, I might have been tempted by his offer. The financial security, the restoration of my professional standing, the return to the familiar world I had lost. All of it might have been appealing when I was struggling just to pay my rent. But I had spent the past year rebuilding not just my case against Meridian, but my entire sense of self-worth and professional identity. I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, formed new relationships based on mutual respect rather than paternalistic dependence, and found work that was not just lucrative, but meaningful. "Augustus," I said finally, "there's nothing you can offer me that would be worth more than what I already have. The truth, a clear conscience, and the satisfaction of knowing that I've held you accountable for what you've done." I picked up my briefcase and prepared to leave. But if you're genuinely interested in making things right, you might start by acknowledging publicly what really happened, compensating the clients who were sold flawed software, and implementing the security fixes I recommended 2 years ago. As I walked away from the man who had once been my mentor and the son who had stolen my life's work, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. The anger that had sustained me through months of investigation and preparation was finally giving way to something more satisfying: the knowledge that justice had been served. The immediate aftermath of the Tech Connect conference was everything I could have hoped for and more. Within hours, videos of the presentation were circulating on social media and professional networks. Industry publications were reaching out for interviews, and several major clients were publicly announcing their intention to suspend their relationships with Meridian pending a full investigation. Dr. Reeves's report, released 3 days after the conference, provided comprehensive documentation of everything we had revealed. The report was downloaded thousands of times in its first week and became required reading for cybersecurity professionals throughout the industry. But the most satisfying development came 2 weeks later when Augustus Sterling called a press conference to announce his immediate retirement and the appointment of an interim management team to oversee Meridian's operations while the company underwent a complete review of its business practices. Recent events have brought to light serious concerns about Meridian's adherence to intellectual property laws and our commitment to cybersecurity best practices, Augustus read from a prepared statement, looking older and more frail than I had ever seen him. While we continue to dispute some of the allegations that have been made, we recognize that our clients deserve better than uncertainty and controversy. Max was notably absent from the press conference. According to industry gossip, he had taken an extended leave of absence and was reportedly considering a career change away from technology entirely. Serafina Cross had resigned from Meridian the day after the conference, citing philosophical differences with the company's direction. She landed a position at a competing firm within a month, though her role in the intellectual property theft had certainly damaged her reputation. As for me, the vindication was both professional and personal. Quantum Solutions offered me a partnership track, and several other firms reached out with lucrative job offers. But more importantly, I had regained something that had been taken from me: my reputation, my self-respect, and my faith in the possibility of justice. 6 months after the conference, I was featured on the cover of Cybersecurity Today magazine with the headline, "The Whistleblower Who Exposed Silicon Valley's Biggest Fraud." The article detailed not just the technical aspects of the case, but the personal journey of fighting back against corporate betrayal. "The most important lesson I learned," I told the interviewer, "is that the truth has a power of its own. It may take time to emerge, and it may require courage to pursue, but ultimately, authenticity and integrity will triumph over deception and manipulation." I also learned something unexpected about the nature of revenge. I had spent months imagining the satisfaction I would feel when Max and Augustus were finally exposed. I had fantasized about their humiliation, their professional downfall, their public disgrace. But when it actually happened, what I felt was not the bitter satisfaction of revenge, but the clean satisfaction of justice. I hadn't destroyed them out of spite. I had held them accountable for their actions and protected other potential victims from their fraud. A difference mattered more than I had anticipated. Revenge would have left me feeling empty and bitter, even in victory. Justice left me feeling whole and hopeful about the future. Today, 3 years after that devastating Tuesday morning when my keycard was deactivated, I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Quantum Solutions and a recognized expert in cybersecurity and intellectual property protection. I speak at conferences around the world, not just about technical topics, but about the importance of ethical business practices and the courage required to speak truth to power. I've also become something of an advocate for other professionals who have faced similar betrayals. Through the Blackwood Foundation, which I established using part of my settlement from Meridian, we provide legal support and career assistance to whistleblowers and victims of intellectual property theft. It's deeply satisfying work that has helped dozens of people reclaim their professional lives and hold bad actors accountable. The foundation also funds scholarships for students from underprivileged backgrounds who want to pursue careers in technology and cybersecurity. I have learned that one of the best ways to prevent future corruption is to ensure that the next generation of leaders comes from diverse backgrounds and has strong ethical foundations. As the Meridian Industries, the company never fully recovered from the scandal. Augustus sold his remaining stake to a private equity firm 6 months after his retirement, and the company was eventually absorbed by a larger competitor. Most of the employees found positions elsewhere, and several of them have reached out over the years to apologize for not speaking up when they witnessed my unfair treatment. Max Sterling did indeed leave the technology industry. Last I heard, he was working as a ski instructor in Colorado, a job that probably better suits his actual skill set than running a tech company. I bear him no ill will at this point. He was an entitled young man who made terrible decisions, but he was also manipulated by his father's ambitions and his girlfriend's schemes. Serafina Cross's career suffered more lasting damage. Her involvement in the intellectual property theft became widely known in the industry. And while she was never criminally prosecuted, her professional reputation never recovered. She eventually left the corporate world and now runs a small marketing consultancy for local businesses. Augustus Sterling's fall from grace was perhaps the most complete. The man who had once been respected as a pillar of the business community spent his final years dealing with multiple lawsuits and regulatory investigations. He passed away 2 years ago, and while I attended his funeral to pay my respects to the man who had once been my mentor, I felt more sadness than satisfaction. His downfall had been entirely self-inflicted, the result of choosing loyalty to his son over loyalty to truth and justice. But perhaps the most important outcome of this entire experience has been the personal growth it forced upon me. When I was first fired from Meridian, I was devastated, not just by the loss of my job, but by the loss of what I thought was my family. Augustus had filled the role of the father I had lost, and his betrayal left me feeling orphaned all over again. The process of fighting back taught me that I didn't need anyone else's approval to validate my worth. My value as a person and as a professional wasn't determined by what Augustus Sterling or anyone else thought of me. It was determined by my own actions, my own integrity, and my own commitment to doing what was right. I also learned the importance of building genuine relationships based on mutual respect rather than dependency. My relationship with Dr. Evangeline Reeves began as a professional collaboration, but has evolved into one of my most treasured friendships. She taught me that mentorship should be about empowering people to find their own strength, not creating dependency. The experience also taught me about the power of patience and strategic thinking. My immediate instinct after being fired had been to lash out, to make accusations, to demand immediate justice. But the most effective response required months of careful preparation, methodical evidence gathering, and strategic planning. The satisfaction of that calculated comeback was far greater than any impulsive reaction could have been. Looking back now, I can honestly say that being fired from Meridian was one of the best things that ever happened to me, even though it certainly didn't feel that way at the time. It forced me to discover strengths I didn't know I possessed, to build new relationships, and to find work that was more meaningful than anything I had done before. I've also learned that the best revenge is not revenge at all, but rather the construction of a life so fulfilling and successful that the people who wronged you become irrelevant to your happiness. Today, when I think about Augustus, Max, and Serafina, I feel neither anger nor satisfaction. I feel nothing at all. They have become minor characters in a story where I am the protagonist. The young professionals I mentor often ask me how I found the courage to take on such powerful people, how I managed to stay focused during months of investigation, how I dealt with the stress and uncertainty of not knowing whether my plan would work. The answer is that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite fear, because the alternative is worse. I was terrified throughout the entire process, terrified that I would fail, that I would be sued, that I would never work in technology again. But I was more terrified of the alternative, living the rest of my life knowing that I had allowed injustice to stand unchallenged. The stress was manageable because I had a clear sense of purpose. Every day I worked on building my case was a day I was moving closer to justice. Even when the work was tedious or frustrating, I could see the bigger picture and understand how each small step contributed to the ultimate goal. And the uncertainty was bearable because I had Dr. Reeves and her team supporting me. I wasn't fighting alone, and I wasn't fighting without resources. Having skilled allies made all the difference in maintaining confidence, even when the outcome was unclear. The other question I'm often asked is whether I would do it all again, knowing what I know now about the personal and professional costs involved. The answer is absolutely yes, not just because of the satisfying outcome, but because of what the process taught me about myself and about the importance of standing up for what's right. I'm a stronger, more confident, more capable person because of what I went through. And the technology industry is a little bit more honest because people like Max Sterling know that they can't get away with stealing other people's work without consequences. But I would also encourage anyone facing a similar situation to be strategic rather than impulsive. Build your case methodically. Document everything. Find allies who have the resources and expertise to help you. And most importantly, make sure you're fighting for justice rather than just revenge, because justice will sustain you through the difficult times, while revenge will only leave you bitter and empty. The final lesson I've learned is about the importance of using success responsibly. When you've been given a second chance, When you've overcome betrayal and built something meaningful from the ashes of your former life, you have an obligation to help others who are facing similar challenges. That's why the foundation work is so important to me, and why I continue to speak publicly about intellectual property theft and workplace ethics. My story isn't unique. There are thousands of professionals who have had their work stolen, their reputations destroyed, and their careers derailed by unethical colleagues and employers. The difference is that I had the technical skills, financial resources, and professional connections necessary to fight back effectively. Not everyone who faces similar betrayal has those advantages. The foundation helps level the playing field by providing legal support, financial assistance, and strategic guidance to people who might otherwise have no recourse. We've helped software developers whose code was stolen by former employers, researchers whose findings were published under other people's names, and inventors whose patents were infringed by larger companies. In each case, the satisfaction of seeing justice done is just as intense as it was when I exposed Meridian's fraud. The foundation has also become a powerful deterrent to potential bad actors. Companies know that intellectual property theft isn't just a matter between them and individual employees. It's something that might attract the attention of an organization with the resources and expertise to expose wrongdoing publicly. As I wrap up this story, I want to leave you with a few questions to think about. Have you ever witnessed injustice in your workplace but stayed silent because speaking up seemed too risky? Have you ever had someone take credit for your ideas or accomplishments? How did you handle the situation? And what would you do differently if faced with similar circumstances today? More broadly, what does success mean to you? Is it money, recognition, power, or something else entirely? And when you achieve success, what responsibility do you have to use it in service of something larger than your own interests? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your own stories of workplace betrayal, professional vindication, or times when you had to choose between playing it safe and standing up for what's right. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of justice, redemption, and the power of refusing to give up when everyone tells you you're beaten. Share this with anyone who needs to be reminded that integrity and persistence can triumph over deception and manipulation. Remember that your worth isn't determined by what others think of you, but by what you think of yourself and how you choose to respond when life tests your character. Sometimes the greatest victories come from the moments when you feel most defeated, as long as you have the courage to keep fighting for what you know is right. But the story doesn't end there. Sometimes life has a way of coming full circle in ways you never expect. 5 years after the Tech Connect conference that changed everything, I received a phone call that would test everything I thought I had learned about forgiveness and second chances. The caller was someone I never expected to hear from again, Augustus Sterling. "Cordelia," came the familiar voice, though it sounded different now, humbler, more uncertain. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I was wondering if we could meet. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have said years ago. ... My first instinct was to hang up. Max had been the architect of my downfall, the person whose greed and incompetence had stolen years of my life and nearly destroyed my career. What could he possibly have to say that would matter to me now? But something in his tone gave me pause. The arrogant confidence that had once defined him was completely gone, replaced by what sounded like genuine remorse and desperation. "I'm not interested in relitigating the past, Max," I said carefully. "I've moved on with my life, and I suggest you do the same with yours." "Please," he said, and I had never heard him use that word before. "Just one conversation. There are things you don't know, things that might change how you see what happened. I owe you that much, at least." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a small cafe in downtown Denver, where I was visiting for a cybersecurity conference. The location felt appropriately neutral, far from Boston, far from the scene of our original conflict, somewhere we could speak as strangers rather than as former enemies. When I arrived at the cafe, I almost didn't recognize the man sitting in the corner booth. The Max Sterling I remembered had been polished, confident, always impeccably dressed and groomed. This man looked like he had aged 10 years in the 5 that had passed. His hair was longer and unkempt. His clothes were casual and worn. And most notably, his entire demeanor was different, subdued, almost fragile. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm still not sure why I did," I replied honestly. "What's this about, Max?" He took a deep breath and looked me directly in the eyes, something he had rarely done during our time working together. "It's about the truth, the whole truth, not just the parts that came out during your presentation at the conference." I waited for him to continue, keeping my expression neutral but attentive. "You were right about everything," he began. "The Sterling Integration Suite was your work. I had nothing to do with its development, and I knew that from the beginning. But what you don't know is that the whole plan to steal your work and fire you wasn't my idea." "Whose idea was it then?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Serafina's," he said quietly. "It was all Serafina's plan from the very beginning." Over the next hour, Max told me a story that was both shocking and yet somehow not surprising. According to his account, Serafina had been planning to position herself as the power behind Meridian's next generation of leadership. From the moment she joined the company, she had identified me as the primary obstacle to that plan, not just because of my technical expertise, but because of my close relationship with Augustus. She knew that as long as you were at the company, Dad would never fully trust anyone else with the technical direction, Max explained. "You were like his technical conscience, the person whose opinion he valued most. As long as you were there, she could never have the influence she wanted." Serafina's plan had been elaborate and long-term. First, she had begun systematically undermining my relationships within the company, spreading subtle doubts about my reliability and commitment. She had volunteered to help with client communications, gradually inserting herself into relationships I had built over years. "She was so good at it," Max said with what sounded like grudging admiration. "She would never say anything directly critical about you, but she would plant seeds of doubt. Cordelia seems overwhelmed lately. I'm a little concerned about her attention to detail on the Morrison project. Do you think she's still fully committed to Meridian, or is she looking for other opportunities?" The second phase of her plan involved positioning Max as a viable successor to Augustus. This required not just building Max up, but also creating a narrative where he could credibly claim credit for major innovations. "She convinced me that I deserved more recognition for my contributions to the company," Max continued. "She said that you and Dad had been minimizing my role, that I had actually been more involved in developing the integration platform than anyone realized." I felt a mixture of anger and pity as I listened to this. Max had been manipulated, certainly, but he had also been willing to be manipulated because it served his ego and ambition. "At first, it was just about taking partial credit," he said. "Serafina convinced me that the platform had been a collaborative effort, that my business insights had been just as important as your technical work. She helped me prepare presentations where I could discuss our joint development process and the strategic vision I had contributed. But partial credit wasn't enough for Serafina's ultimate plan. She needed Max to be seen as the primary innovator, which meant I had to be removed from the picture entirely. The security vulnerabilities you had identified became her weapon," Max explained. "She convinced Dad that you were being overly cautious, that you were trying to delay the product launch with unnecessary concerns. She said that a more experienced business leader, meaning me, could evaluate those concerns and make the tough decisions about what was really necessary, versus what was just perfectionist overcaution. A final phase had been the most brutal, manufacturing cause for my termination. Serafina had gradually built a case that I was becoming unreliable, possibly even disloyal to the company. She had documented instances where I had missed meetings I had never been invited to. She had created communication trails suggesting I was uncooperative, using edited email threads that made my professional disagreements look like personal attacks. The intellectual property allegations were her masterstroke, Max said, his voice heavy with guilt. She convinced Dad that you might be preparing to leave Meridian and take proprietary information with you. She said that your recent behavior suggested you were documenting company processes and technologies in ways that went beyond normal job responsibilities. But there was no evidence of that, I pointed out, because it wasn't true. She created evidence, Max replied. Or at least she created things that looked like evidence to someone who wanted to believe them. Files on your computer that seemed to document company processes in unusual detail. Email communications with outside contacts that could be interpreted as job searches or information sharing. I felt sick as I realized the full scope of what had been done to me. It wasn't just that my work had been stolen. My entire professional reputation had been systematically destroyed through a campaign of lies and manipulation. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Why does any of this matter 5 years later? Max looked down at his hands. Because Serafina did the same thing to me. The story that unfolded next was both predictable and satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. After my departure from Meridian, Serafina had continued implementing her long-term plan. With me out of the picture, she had begun positioning herself as the real strategic mind behind the company's success, gradually undermining Max's credibility just as she had undermined mine. At first, it was subtle, Max explained. She would support me in meetings, but then privately express concerns to Dad about my decision-making. She would volunteer to help me prepare for important presentations, then make suggestions that made me look unprepared or uncertain. As the security vulnerabilities in the stolen platform began causing problems for Meridian's clients, Serafina had skillfully managed to deflect blame away from herself and onto Max. She had positioned herself as the voice of caution, who had tried to warn about potential issues, but had been overruled by Max's inexperience. She documented everything, Max said. Every conversation, every decision, every mistake. She built a case that I was in over my head, that I was making costly errors because I lacked the technical knowledge and business judgment necessary for my role. The final blow had come when several major clients threatened lawsuits over the security breaches in their systems. Serafina had presented Augustus with a comprehensive report detailing Max's mismanagement of the technical issues, his failure to address known vulnerabilities, and his inability to maintain client confidence. Dad fired me 18 months after your conference presentation, Max said. Serafina had convinced him that I was a liability to the company, that keeping me on would only lead to more legal and financial problems. But Serafina's victory had been short-lived. Without the technical expertise she had systematically removed from the company, first me, then Max, Meridian had been unable to address the mounting problems with its systems. Client defections had accelerated, new business had dried up, and the company had eventually been forced to declare bankruptcy. She jumped ship about 6 months before the end, Max said, took a position with Harrington Consulting, and left Dad holding the bag for everything that went wrong. I listened to this account with mixed feelings. Part of me felt vindicated. My suspicions about Serafina's manipulative nature had been correct. But part of me also felt sadness for Augustus, who had been played just as thoroughly as Max and I had been. What happened to your father? I asked. He's gone, Max said quietly. He had a heart attack about a year after the bankruptcy. I think the stress and shame of losing everything just wore him down. We sat in silence for a few moments, both processing the full scope of the tragedy that had unfolded. A successful company destroyed, careers ruined, relationships shattered, and ultimately, a life lost. All because one person had been willing to manipulate and betray everyone around her in pursuit of power and control. I'm sorry, Max said finally. I know that doesn't change anything, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I understand now what really happened. You weren't the problem. I was just too stupid and selfish to see it at the time." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But what I saw was genuine remorse. A man who had been forced to confront the consequences of his choices and found them devastating. "What are you doing now?" I asked. "I teach skiing in Colorado, like you probably heard," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "It's honest work, and I'm actually pretty good at it. The mountains are peaceful, and the people I work with don't care about my business background or my family connections. They just care about whether I can help them improve their technique and stay safe on the slopes." He paused, then added, "I'm also in therapy, trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could be so easily manipulated, who could let my ego override my conscience. It's been educational." I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected: respect for the person Max had apparently become. The arrogant, entitled young man I had known had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely committed to understanding his mistakes and making amends for them. "Why did you really want to meet with me?" I asked. "What do you want from this conversation?" Max considered the question carefully. "I wanted you to know that you were right to fight back," he said. "I wanted you to understand that the betrayal went deeper and even you knew. But also that your response to it was exactly what someone in your situation should do. You had the courage to stand up for yourself when no one else would, and you found a way to hold people accountable without destroying yourself in the process." He leaned forward slightly. "But mostly, I wanted to ask if there was any way I could help make things right. I know I can't undo what happened, but if there's anything I can do to help the people who were hurt by what we did." I thought about his offer. There probably wasn't much that Max could do at this point to address the harm that had been done. The victims of Meridian's security breaches had been compensated through insurance and legal settlements. The employees who had lost their jobs had moved on to new positions. The damage to various reputations had been largely repaired or forgotten. But there was one thing that his story had given me: a more complete understanding of what had actually happened and why. That understanding didn't change the facts, but it did provide a kind of closure that I hadn't realized I was missing. "Thank you for telling me the truth," I said finally. "I can't say that it changes how I feel about what happened, but it helps me understand it better. And understanding is important." Max nodded, seeming to accept that this was as much reconciliation as he could reasonably expect. As we prepared to part ways, he asked one final question. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had all just been honest with each other from the beginning? If I had admitted that I didn't have the technical knowledge to run the company, if Serafina had focused on building rather than destroying, if Dad had been willing to see past his parental blind spot?" I considered the question. "I think about it sometimes," I admitted. "But I've also learned that there's not much point in dwelling on alternate histories. We can't change what happened, but we can learn from it and try to make better choices going forward. Have you forgiven us?" he asked quietly. I thought about that question for a long moment. Forgiveness was something I had struggled with throughout this entire journey. For years, I had carried anger and resentment that had both motivated and burdened me. "I've forgiven myself," I said finally. "I've forgiven myself for being naive enough to trust people who didn't deserve it, for not seeing the warning signs that were probably there all along, for taking so long to fight back when I should have stood up for myself sooner." I paused, then continued. "As for forgiving you and your father and Serafina, I think forgiveness is less about absolving you of responsibility and more about freeing myself from the burden of carrying anger. So yes, I suppose I have forgiven you, in the sense that I'm no longer defined by what you did to me." Max seemed to understand the distinction. "Thank you," he said simply. As I watched him walk away from the cafe, I reflected on how much had changed since that devastating day when I was escorted out of Meridian's offices. I had not only rebuilt my career and regained my reputation, but I had also gained something perhaps more valuable: a deep understanding of my own strength and resilience. A conversation with Max had provided an unexpected gift, not closure exactly, but a more complete picture of events that had shaped so much of my life. It reminded me that even the people who hurt us are human beings with their own vulnerabilities and mistakes, and that understanding their motivations doesn't excuse their actions, but can help us make sense of our experiences. Most importantly, it reinforced something I had learned through years of helping others through the foundation. The people who try to tear you down usually do so because they feel threatened by your strength, your integrity, or your potential. Serafina had targeted me not because I was weak, but because I was strong. Understanding that distinction had been crucial to my recovery and growth. The epilogue to this story came 2 years later, when I received a news clipping in the mail with a note from Jerome, the security guard who had helped expose the truth about what happened at Meridian. The clipping was a small item from a business journal, reporting that Serafina Cross had been terminated from her position at Harrington Consulting, following allegations of ethical violations and conflicts of interest. According to the article, she had been accused of manipulating client relationships, misrepresenting her contributions to project successes, and creating a toxic work environment through systematic undermining of colleagues. The pattern was exactly the same as what she had done at Meridian, but this time, her targets had been quicker to recognize what was happening and more willing to fight back. "Thought you might find this interesting," Jerome's note read. "Looks like some people never learn new tricks, but sometimes the world catches up with them anyway." I filed the clipping away without much emotion. Serafina's downfall didn't provide the satisfaction I might once have expected. By that point in my journey, her fate was simply irrelevant to my happiness and success. The real victory wasn't in seeing my former enemies fail. It was in building a life so meaningful and fulfilling that their approval or disapproval no longer mattered. The real success wasn't in proving them wrong about me. It was in proving to myself that I was capable of far more than I had ever imagined. Today, as I continue to speak at conferences, mentor young professionals, and run the foundation that helps others fight similar battles, I'm often asked about the key lessons from my experience. The answer has evolved over the years, but these are the insights that have proven most valuable. First, trust your instincts. When something feels wrong in your workplace or your relationships, pay attention to that feeling. Don't dismiss your concerns just because others tell you you're being paranoid or oversensitive. Second, document everything. In any professional dispute, having contemporaneous records of conversations, decisions, and events is invaluable. People's memories are fallible and sometimes conveniently selective, but documentation provides objective evidence. Third, build a network of genuine allies. The people who helped me fight back, Dr. Reeves, Jerome, the clients who agreed to security assessments, were all relationships based on mutual respect and shared values. Those kinds of alliances are more valuable than any amount of money or political influence. Fourth, be patient and strategic. The immediate impulse when you've been wronged is to lash out, to demand immediate justice. But the most effective response is usually a measured one that allows you to build a strong case and choose the timing and manner of your response. Fifth, focus on justice rather than revenge. Revenge is about making your enemies suffer. Justice is about making things right. The former will leave you bitter even in victory, while the latter will leave you at peace. Finally, use your success responsibly. When you overcome adversity and rebuild your life, you have an obligation to help others who face similar challenges. Success isn't just about personal achievement. It's about creating positive change in the world. As I finish sharing this story with you, I want to leave you with some questions that I hope will resonate with your own experiences and challenges. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you knew something was wrong, but felt powerless to address it? How did you handle that situation, and what would you do differently today? When someone has betrayed your trust or undermined your success, how do you balance the desire for justice with the need to move forward with your life? What does forgiveness mean to you? Is it about absolving others of responsibility, or is it about freeing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment? How do you distinguish between healthy ambition and destructive manipulation in yourself and others? What warning signs do you watch for? When you achieve success, particularly success that comes after overcoming significant challenges, What responsibility do you feel to help others who face similar obstacles? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Share your own stories of workplace betrayal, professional redemption, or times when you had to choose between taking the easy path and fighting for what you knew was right. If this story has inspired or motivated you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about resilience, justice, and the power of refusing to give up when life tests your character. Share this with anyone who might benefit from being reminded that integrity and persistence can triumph over deception and manipulation, even when the odds seem impossibly stacked against you. Remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to respond when your character is tested. Sometimes the greatest victories come from the moments when you feel most defeated, as long as you have the courage to keep fighting for what you know is right. Thank you for listening to my complete journey from devastating betrayal through strategic vindication to ultimate peace and purpose. And remember, the best revenge truly is a life well lived, justice well served, and wisdom shared with others who need to hear that they too have the strength to overcome whatever challenges they're facing.